Science Media Centre for setting up this online briefing, and particular welcome to those who are at the other end, hopefully who will find it muted. Particular welcome also to Rosemary Quinn from GNS, who has joined us today, and she will also be available for media comments afterwards, as of course I will. A number of my staff are here today, especially introduce Quentin Duthie over there, who's led this investigation thus far, and Grant Blackwell, who is my principal science advisor and will be leading the second phase of the investigation. The fracking has an issue not just in New Zealand but overseas, and I began this investigation because of many requests to do so from MPs, from councils and from members of the public. They undertook to put a report out before the end of the year, and in the time since we began in March, it's only been possible to produce an interim report, but as you'll see from what the copies you have chairs there, with appendices, it's still 120 pages. There's a lot to understand in this area. Reports are coming out all the time from other countries. It seems every couple of days at the moment we're discovering a new one. And with a second phase of the work, we will be able to use more of this material. It's a hot subject in many countries. So tomorrow in my office, work begins on the second phase of this investigation, and we'll produce a second and final report. What is fracking? It's a contraction of the mouthful hydraulic fracturing using pressurised liquid, that is like hydraulic brakes work, to crack rock using the liquid to transmit the force. It's a coincidence that frack rhymes with crack. There are many concerns about it, environmentally, contamination of groundwater, greenhouse gases, emissions, and earthquakes are another issue there. But many of the concerns around it, as we've discovered, are not environmental. A lot of economic concerns, a lot of local concerns. Who would really get the jobs? Skilled people from overseas or the unemployed in the region? So obviously as Environment Commissioner, I have focused on the environmental side of things. So moving on to a high-level description of why fracking. Oil and gas are found in porous rock. Porous rock has holes in it like a sponge. In conventional drilling for oil and gas, the rock that it's being drilled into is not only porous, holding the oil and gas in those little holes, but it is also permeable. The holes are joined up, and that's the picture there on the left, porous and permeable. So with conventional oil and gas drilling, they drill through an impermeable cap rock into the porous rock below. Now, when that rock below is porous but not permeable, like the picture on the right, fracking is being used increasingly to create cracks and basically to join up the holes so that the oil and gas can flow. The first hydraulic frack in the world that happened some time ago, I was actually 3 days old. The first time it was used in New Zealand was 23 years ago, so it's not new, although the scale at which it's being used is new. So how does it actually work in practice? Basically drilling down, same as for a conventional well, through different layers of rocks and aquifers, casing that well in steel and using cement to join the well up to the rock surrounding it. Then what's called a perforating gun is put down, and that gun shoots tiny holes in the casing of the well. Then the fracking fluid is injected at high pressure, shoots through those holes and creates the cracks. Now, so if you imagine a vertical well going down, the cracks that are coming out from it are a few millimetres wide, but in depth they're actually tens of metres deep, and they can be hundreds of metres long. So very different in the 3 dimensions of the cracks. So what happens then is much of the fracking fluid returns. That's the red coming up. The oil and gas start to flow. There's usually some of both. That's the black. And then the other thing that comes out is what the industry call brine, which is salty water, groundwater that comes from deep down below the surface, kilometres down typically. And that salty water is actually brine, is saltier than the sea. That comes out as well. That comes out through the production lifetime of the well, not just in the beginning. and comes out with conventional drilling as well. There's nothing unique to fracking there. That brine can contain heavy metals, hydrocarbons and so on. In New Zealand, what's happened with fracking here? What's the story here? Three kinds really. The first one is what is already taking place most commonly, and that's in Taranaki, as you'll know, and it's what's called tight sands fracking. So the conventional drilling in Taranaki is basically sandstone, we get into to take out the oil and gas. When that sandstone, the holes in it aren't joined up all that well, it is called tight. So tight sands, and so most of the fracking that has taken place so far, certainly all the production fracking, has been in Taranaki in tight sands. However, there are two other kinds where we might see it happening in New Zealand. The first one is called coal seam gas. This is methane that is produced in conjunction with coal under the ground. Of course, with natural gas, the main component of it is actually methane. That has been done with a pilot plant in the Waikato by Solid Energy, now moving their operations to Taranaki. So they're just really testing it to see if they can get it to work. There was in 1995 an attempt in Southland at Ojai, but that was unsuccessful. But there is potential in many places for coal seam gas, Canterbury, Otago, Southland, and other places in New Zealand. The third kind of fracking that we might see in New Zealand hasn't been done at all yet. That is known as the East Coast Shale. We're talking here about Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa. There's some initial exploration going on there. Of course, in the United States, the fracking that has gone on there has been fracking shale to get gas out, not so much oil yet. And the fracking that's gone on in Australia has actually been the second kind of coal seam gas. You can't isolate the process of fracking from the whole process of oil and gas production. And there are actually 7 stages, and we lay out a couple of chapters in the report dividing them up in this way so people can understand what's involved. So you can read it there, where to drill, establishing the drill site, drilling the well, and then actual fracking, which I described earlier, flowback, which is when the brine comes up, the fracking fluid comes back, and then transition into production, dealing with the waste and abandoning the well. Now, many of the concerns, including the environmental impacts, are not just associated with the actual process of fracking. But what fracking does is provide the potential for scaling up and expansion of the industry into new parts of the country, scaling up within and beyond Taranaki. So when that happens, environmental risks that might exist also in other parts of the process, not just in the fracking, become cumulative. And so really you can't just look at fracking in isolation from that whole process of oil and gas production. You have to look at it as the enabler of a possible great expansion of that, and look at the impacts of that as a whole. So for instance, if there's a big scale up, there will be a lot more waste to deal with. The issues around water contamination, earthquakes, and so on, I have not yet seen anything that really is a big red flag about what has happened so far in Taranaki. But yet, I don't know yet how well monitoring has been done, how thorough the monitoring has been done. But my main conclusion is that the risks are low if everything is done in line with best practice. And I want to cut to the chase and talk about that best practice. And there are 4 things that matter that you have to get right if you are going to control the environmental risks. The first one is watch where you drill. You want to keep away from active faults. This is the earthquake issue. The process of creating the cracks itself is not so much the earthquake risk, but if fluid, whether it be fracking fluid or waste water, gets into a fault that is stressed, that is active and stressed, and just, so 2 pieces of rock like this, and just forces them apart a bit, you can trigger earthquakes. So you want to keep away from those sorts of situations, and you also want to keep away from the risk of contaminating important aquifers. The second thing that you absolutely have to get right is what's called the integrity of the well, and that's to do with the casing, the way the well is cased in steel. Sometimes the situations need to be multiple layers of the steel. Very important to get the cement right so there are no holes through which contaminants can travel, and it needs to be strongly bonded to the surrounding rock and able to withstand ground movements, of which you know we have quite a lot in New Zealand. And this is key to avoiding water contamination where problems have occurred overseas. The third thing we absolutely have to get right is the one that perhaps seems the easiest, but there is a thing called human error, and that's avoiding spills and leaks on the surface. Spills and leaks of both fracking fluid, what is injected down into the well, and waste water that comes out. And when fracking fluid components, that some of them can be toxic, are at their highest concentration is when they are trucked onto the site for mixing prior to being injected into the ground. And so you really do not want to be spilling them on the earth at that point. And again, this has happened overseas in terms of contamination of groundwater. The fourth one you absolutely have to get right is dealing with waste. Now, this is a picture of what's called a re-injection well. It's used for pumping wastewater back into the ground. If you recall, this wastewater, this brine, comes from deep down in the ground, as far as say 5 kilometres down, and fortunately it's not put back into, not put into rivers, but is pumped back into the ground. There's a lot of waste actually. There's waste from drilling, rock cuttings, and what's called drilling mud, which aids the process of drilling. There is the returning fracking fluid, and then there is this salty water that comes up. The re-injection of wastewater, if you do it poorly, again you risk contaminating groundwater, and again you need to keep away from active faults, because remember this wastewater is there for the lifetime of production of the well, so it's actually much greater volume than the fracking fluid. Climate change is the biggest environmental issue of all. Does fracking help or hinder? This is an active area of debate internationally. Natural gas is the most benign of the fossil fuels. When you burn it to get the energy out, it has the lowest carbon dioxide emissions. And there is the one side of the argument goes that more gas from fracking can replace coal, and you can see how that could be a very good thing in China in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But the other side of the argument is that if you have plentiful natural gas and indeed oil from fracking, then you will displace investments in renewables. So is fracking a bridge to a low carbon future or not? That's difficult, not impossible to answer. We've written quite a lot about this in the report. I think we'll talk more about it later, but it really depends. It's about a complex mixture of markets worldwide at different prices. And it's why an ETS, an emissions trading scheme with a strong price signal, is so critically important, and of course we don't have that now. There are three aspects of government oversight and regulation that I'm concerned about that will be a focus of the second stage of the investigation. The first is that government oversight is complex and fragmented. So it's not clear where accountability lies. It was a major exercise in this project just to write the chapter untangling the different central government agencies, what their roles actually are under different legislation, and of course the councils locally, both regional and district councils. So just trying to sort that out. And when you get this complexity and fragmentation, you can get a risk of things falling between the cracks, excuse the pun, and there is a lack of strategic oversight. The second thing is that regulation may be too light-handed. One of the high-level officials in the International Energy Agency, speaking about fracking recently, said just trust us is not good enough. And one of the things we want to look at, the second phase of this report, is how much of that, as it were, going on, or how much can we trust the industry. The third one is what's called a social license to operate, and that has yet to be earned. It's a rather curious phrase which the industry itself uses, and it's really about earning public trust. It's not that with any activity all the public are going to agree with it. I think it's a good thing, but that that public trust has not been earned. I mean, the concern about fracking is widespread, and as I said before, it's not just in New Zealand; it's here as well. So, for example, full disclosure of the components of fracking fluid might go some way towards earning that public trust. I've made an interim conclusion in this report, and it does echo the UK Royal Society report, which came out earlier this year. That report was said at the time by some have given a big tick to fracking. That is not the case, and it's certainly not what I'm doing here today. What the UK Royal Society said is that the environmental risks and the health and safety risks, because they were looking at both, of fracking can be managed effectively, provided, and that proviso is enormously important, provided best practice is actually being implemented and enforced through regulation. And that proviso, if you like, is going to be the focus of the second phase of the investigation. We cannot simply say things have gone okay in Taranaki, bar a few glitches, and extrapolate from there. An oil company executive recently in New Zealand supposedly said that the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand could become the Texas of the South. I don't think he realised that this would not necessarily gladden the hearts of many New Zealanders. This photograph is actually not Texas but Wyoming, but I hope there's no possibility that Hawke's Bay will end up looking like this, but I want to make sure. There are two ways, as I said earlier, in which fracking could expand beyond Taranaki. You're dealing with the east coast, the North Island east coast shale first. This would involve fracking shale rather than tight sand, so it's a different kind of fracking. Hawke's Bay, Gisborne and Wairarapa are very different from Taranaki in many regards. The geology is different, the rocks are much more folded and faulted, faults. There is different hydrogeology, that is aquifers are very different. It's a drier part of the country and its reliance on imported aquifers, and of course it's more active seismically. The second way in which fracking could expand beyond Taranaki is this coal seam gas with potential in much of the country, and if that was to be obtained from Canterbury, Otago, Southland, again it's very different from Taranaki. For a start, it's done at considerably shallower depths, much more in the vicinity of aquifers, or the level of that, the depth of that. So I'm not calling for a moratorium at this stage. Recommending a moratorium is a good thing to do, and I wouldn't do it lightly. It's a business employing lots of people with livelihoods at stake here. But I am the Environment Commissioner, so the environment must be my primary concern. As I said earlier, I've not seen anything yet that is of high and urgent concern, but that is not to say that everything has been done perfectly so far. If during the second phase I do discover things that are sufficiently worrying, I will not hesitate to call for a moratorium. So while this is an interim report, it does contain a great deal of information on fracking, what it is, how it works, what really matters for reducing environmental risks, and the roles that are currently played by central and local government. We have striven to write it in plain English, and hopefully it will foster a more informed debate. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
What do you conclude whether or not fracking is safe in New Zealand at this stage? What's your initial perception?
I think it's safe enough, not in my judgment, so that I don't need to call for a moratorium.
What would you need to see for you to call a moratorium?
Something that's something in the way of the regulation, the way of management that caused me alarm at what's gone on in Taranaki, for example. But also, we really want to look ahead to where fracking might go and see if the regulation we have, the kind of government arrangements for oversight and so on, are adequate to deal with that.
Do you have to say that it's safe or that we don't know how safe it is? Because as you said, the oil and gas industry is not only regulating itself but monitoring itself.
No, I said that what I actually said in the report is that regulation may be too light-handed. My suspicion, my guess is that companies probably vary a lot, and one of the things that's happening, and certainly would happen if a lot more companies come into the country. Certainly within Taranaki there is quite a difference in the way in which different companies are engaging with their local communities. So I think there could likely be variation between companies on other grounds, but we need to look at that. So I can't tell you.
Is there something that the government could do, or is there something you'd like to see them do between now and when your final report comes out?
I'd like them to read this, understand it, and start to think about it. And also that high-level strategic overview. The government is already doing something quite significant, which again is something we need to take account of. There are regulations under the Health and Safety and Environment Act that's protecting health and safety of workers in oil and gas that are currently under review, and there is quite an overlap between health and safety concerns and environmental concerns. In fact, in the UK report, they actually recommend that those be put closer together. For example, the integrity of the well matters for the environment and it matters for health and safety of the workers as well. So it's a very active space with all kinds of things going on. So we'll be looking to see where the government's going with that.
I guess, is there anything that you can see that at this point that could be done to make those regulations simpler and easier to work with?
We do go into some of that with the report, but no, I can't just say offhand what it'll be. It's going to require some more examination.
But do you envisage in the future that there will need to be law changes, tighter regulations for this industry as it looks to expand this particular carpet?
It could well be. One of the things that I want to find out more about is about monitoring, to actually see just how well this is done on the ground, whether the monitoring is adequate. So that's going into local government as well as central government.
And are you saying that potential fracking on the East Coast would be potentially more dangerous or high risk on the East Coast than it would be?
I'm saying that it is very different. On the surface of it, it looks more high risk for earthquakes. Obviously, it's seismically more active. The shale it's shale rather than tight sand, so it's more, the transition from conventional oil and gas to the tight sands fracking is not such a big transition as maybe for fracking on the shale. The shale is at different depths, so there's issues there. Aquifers, as I said before, are very important. So it is very different. And so it's really about looking ahead and thinking what would have to be in place so we could be comfortable about that. There's also that landscape issue, which you can see in that photograph. Is there a possibility that Hawke's Bay could end up looking like that or not?
You see that the companies...
Can we talk on the phone yet, or?
There was just a couple of questions first. You mentioned
Just a minute.
You mentioned earthquakes, Jane.
Yes.
The Royal Society report, I think, discounted that. It said there was not likely to be any worse than blast of an underground coal mine. You sound to be a different point of view.
Well, I'll spell out earthquakes. The first thing is that when you actually create the cracks, there are tiny earthquakes, not even worthy of the name earthquakes, that you'll never feel on the surface, so that's insignificant. The bigger risk is when you get fluid in a fault that is stressed, so that fluid can get in between those rock faces and trigger a slip. And that could be fracking fluid, or it could be the wastewater that is being re-injected into the well. There have been 3 places worldwide, correct me if it's quite right, where the fracking earthquakes have been associated with fracking fluid: British Columbia, and Lancashire in England, and remember? Oklahoma. But they have been small, they've been of the order of 2 or 3. The next stage is the wastewater. I think the risk is bigger with the wastewater because you've got larger volumes over a much longer period of time, and you're injecting them at high pressure. There has been one around 5 in Colorado, but more than a 5, which is getting really significant. But of course, as we know from Christchurch, the depth matters as well as the magnitude of earthquakes. So probably a small risk, but in my mind, the only way to think about this is to keep away from those active faults, find out if those active faults are there, and keep away from them, especially when we're doing that in Canterbury.
But you're not talking about a Canterbury size earthquake?
Well, who knows? I mean, it's hard to know whether New Zealand is very seismically active compared to other parts of the world. So the risk, in fact, could be greater here, but this is very difficult to judge. And one of the things I'm hoping, one of the advantages really of this interim report, which I've never done this before, is that people will be able to read it and write it and say, actually, we think such and such, or we'd like to ask a question, we think you got this wrong. So I'm hoping that some more information might come in. But this is a very difficult thing to judge. I mean, life is basically not safe, and there are risks all the time. So how you measure those is not just about science.
How close to a fault line is too close?
So give us some examples of self-regulation. You talk about which companies are doing it and where.
Well, a lot of the monitoring is done by the companies themselves, and they give the reports to councils. Now, that's one example. I think councils do a bit themselves. That's one I'd be particularly interested in. The other thing is that when the companies, this issue of cement around the casings, the way in which that is tested is what's called cement bond logs, and the companies give that to the councils. So, you know, there are questions around council capacity to actually read and understand those things. So,
And
there are
you're not
issues
making
there. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit vague.
Yeah, you're not making any recommendations around that.
I'm not making any formal recommendations in this report at all. What I'm doing is making interim findings, and of which those 4 things that you need to do well if you're going to avoid these risks become significant, and then concerns are here. But there will be formal recommendations in the next report.
Did you read any of those reports?
Sorry,
Yeah, Commissioner, you mentioned the sort of concerns internationally and nationally about fracking, but in the reports that you look at, I mean, have you found anything to really warrant this sort of level of type of concern? Because if there's 3 cases of documented cases of earthquakes from all the fracking that's been done around the world, that doesn't sound like a lot.
well, has that fracking been done in places that are seismically active? But, you know, to put it in perspective again, there are other human activities that generate earthquakes. The filling of the Beadmore Dam, for example, generated an earthquake. It is something that we need to pay attention for, because it's something that people are really worried about.
Yes, but are those worries really justified? I mean, politically, there's been a lot of drum beating, but realistically, has it all got a bit out of hand?
Well, I would invite you to read the report and reach your own judgment.
What do you say,
One of the
Thomas?
points that Gavin's making is that we think of something like the seismic event in Canterbury being a different class of event
That's right.
from man-made activities. And it wasn't, it couldn't destroy a whole city. So it's unlikely that there'd be that kind of causal link.
Well, yes, it is unlikely, but it's unlikely that an earthquake would have done that to Christchurch and been that shallow. You know, the problem with this is that the judgment of risk is somewhat of an individual thing. I cannot hand on heart say that would never happen. But we do have thousands of earthquakes a year in New Zealand, different sizes, so maybe it's not a big thing. But what we've done is present what is known worldwide. There is nothing, no New Zealand earthquakes in Taranaki have been linked to fracking in Taranaki yet. GNS is looking at that. So, you know, probably it is very small, but why would you frack in the vicinity of an active fault if you could avoid it?
How likely is it that people will moratorium after the second report just from more information going so far?
I think calling a moratorium is actually a very big step. As I said earlier, you can't distinguish the environmental impacts of fracking to just that process of fracking. What fracking does, because it enables that scale up, is you have to look at the environmental impacts all the way through. And so I find it a little hard to see how you call a moratorium on the entire industry, on the whole business of oil and gas production, because you'd really, to be fair, you possibly have to look at conventional as well. That would be a very big
What do you say to those people who have watched that movie Gaslands or whatever, and for whatever reason think this is the evilest practice in the world, they've seen people lighting taps and that sort of stuff. What's the message to those people?
Well, the lighting of the taps in the movie, which is most dramatic, but that has been pretty well established that would have been methane that was naturally present in the groundwater. However, methane has been resulting from fracking has got into groundwater in places in the past. So again, maybe not. Certainly, that documentary is quite impossible to judge the validity of a lot of the claims simply because of the way it's made. Certainly, I think that the word frack itself obviously doesn't help.
Has the debate become too emotive? I mean, it's become too emotive and too we lost the
I think that this environmental issues do tend to rise up and become big in But all I can say is that around the world, in many countries, there are reports being done by various august bodies. And the EPA has done one, a couple in the States already, the EPA there, and has another very big one coming up in 2014. Germany is working on this, the UK is working on this. Canada has 2 reports coming out. It goes on and on. So regardless of whether one thinks that it has been blown up, other governments are taking this very seriously.
The Greens are no doubt going to continue to call for a moratorium despite findings, despite you not doing that. Do you think they're out of step? Are they asking for too much?
My job is to advise all MPs of all parties and to just call it as I see it. And sometimes different parties agree with me.
But a moratorium is unlikely.
You mean in the second, I would have to see something that was really very convincing and quite alarming to call for a moratorium, but I'm not ruling that out.
Did you find any evidence of environmental damage as a result of fracking in New Zealand?
There's a little bit so far, although there's the case of the unlined pits in Kapuni, although most of that is legacy, hydrocarbons being stored in pits without plastic underneath, that's no longer best practice. There's been one incident where there was a lot of rain, and so wastewater that was stored overflowed over each of the bunds. But no, not really yet. There is, of course, this more recent issue that was in the paper the other day about flaring and whether, in fact, because people who live near these, the flaring can be quite disruptive for them, that conditions in the resource consent issued by Stratford Council are not being complied with. I'll be having a look closer at that. So.
Can I ask a question on the phone?
Yes. Who's this?
Yeah, I'm just interested in, I mean, how much weight do you think it's going to be proper for you to put on the historical experience of damage from fracking in Taranaki, given that it's, I mean, yeah, it's been going on for a number of years, but it's on a fairly small scale. When, if there is a big acceleration of fracking, if we're anything like Queensland, for instance, it will happen potentially incredibly quickly, and potentially at a pace that would escalate ahead of the ability of regulation to catch up, unless the regulations are in place properly in the first place. So I'm just curious about this, the commentary about whether or not there's been damage in Taranaki. Frankly, how relevant is that going to be to the issue?
Well, not all that relevant, which is why this report needs to go beyond auditing the Taranaki experience and looking back at the past. Certainly the number of wells being drilled in Taranaki is picked up, and you can see changes in the way the council there has operated. For example, until quite recently, the Taranaki Regional Council did not require resource consents for drilling, for fracking, and now they changed their minds and do. So obviously there's an improvement there. But you're absolutely right. The big questions are looking to where this might go, and we know in New Zealand that changes can happen quite fast. I think going back a few years, the way in which just in Taupo we've seen a very large-scale conversion of forestry to dairying is something that no one predicted. It just can happen quite fast. I don't think that we're quite at that stage yet. We've got a little time to think about it. But yes, my concern is really that we've got the right regulatory framework, the right government oversight for that kind of potential expansion. If oil is discovered on the east coast and commercial quantities through fracking, then it could all be on.
And I mean, and you actually are raising a big red flag about regulation, are you not? I mean, you're saying that the regulation is likely to be inadequate in that the companies are left to regulate and monitor themselves effectively.
I'm asking...
And we know what's happened as a consequence of that in the mining industry.
That's a question that we're going to get right into now. So is that a problem or not? I mean, I think you're referring to the Pike River tragedy,
yes,
where that report, of course, is causing quite a rethink about regulation. So we really want to have a good look at that and see if it's adequate. But all I can say is, at the moment, there seems to be quite a degree of trust, which may in fact not have caused problems so far, but might in the future.
Excuse me, have you seen any overseas regulatory regimes of fracking that you like the look of that would provide safety assurance, and are we going into new ground here?
Well, the International Energy Agency has published a very important report, which they call the Golden Rules report, and they have in that, we refer to it in our report, what are the golden rules that should govern fracking, of which the first set is watch where you drill, which is the first one too. So they've laid out some high-level golden rules that should control that. There are quite a number of recommendations from the UK there in their report. So again, looking at those international ones more closely is going to be important.
But have you seen anywhere doing it how you like?
Well, we mean to say on the golden rules sort of look fine, but you have to work out how well they are translated into New Zealand regulation, to the New Zealand situation, because we do things differently from other jurisdictions. I mean, the whole effects-based RMA, for instance, is different from the Northern countries. So it's going to take a bit more work to look at that.
Dan, do you have on the climate change question, do you have you posed two alternative points of view about it. One,
yes.
that it's a bridging fuel, natural gas is a bridging fuel, or alternatively it's going to displace new investment in renewables. Given the New Zealand energy footprint, and particularly electricity with a high rate of renewables, do you have a view on what role a big expansion of gas from the fracking, if fracking really took off, what sort of impact that would have on New Zealand's greenhouse gas footprint?
Right. Yes, you have
Which of those two options would it mean for us?
Right. Well, you have to think about gas and oil separately, and if we do the East Coast shale, that will be more attractive if it's oil. Gas, of course, isn't so easily exported. Liquefied. That requires quite a lot of investment to do that. Although you can do things like this, like ethanol, and then export that, the liquid. However, but if I talk specifically about New Zealand, on the positive side, if we had coal seam gas in the south of the country, then perhaps we wouldn't be burning lignite in the Edendale dairy factory in Southland. We wouldn't be burning coal in the Clandeboye dairy factory near Timaru. But if we go into the North Island, we're already seeing more gas-powered power plants being built, and that is a concern to me. That was something we wrote about in my last report, actually. And if we allow New Zealand's electricity use to become more peaky in winter, then that does lead us down to building more gas power plants. And of course, there's relative prices as well. So, however, if we had more gas and we extracted the propane and butane and did LPG with that and ran vehicles on that, that would be a good thing for our greenhouse gas emissions. It's really mixed bag. We did do a calculation that of all the coal we use in New Zealand, which is actually quite small, because it's the coal burnt in Huntly for the power plant there, and the dairy factory processing I referred to earlier, you're really talking about 2% of our carbon dioxide emissions, which is about 1% of total. So it's not a big effect in New Zealand. But so it's really a matter of thinking. But really, when you start to think about it more deeply, what happens in New Zealand is only a little part of the picture, because we've joined up globally. And the argument that fracking is good for climate change is very much based on the recent US experience, where they've had a lot of conversion of coal-burning power plants, particularly to gas. And therefore, this has been said, well, fracking has done this, and in fact, the US is meeting its greenhouse gas target as a result. When you look into that more carefully, you find out that the EPA has put responsible for closing down a lot of the old coal power plants because they're dirty in terms of local air pollution. And secondly, you find that the recession has actually been quite responsible for a lot of it, because everything has fallen, not just the greenhouse gases associated with electricity. So it's not a simple yes, no. However, as I said earlier, if we went to China, and China produced a lot of gas from fracking, given that, you know, one of the big drivers globally of carbon dioxide emissions is that coal in China, that would seem to me a good thing. There is another issue here, which is around the total greenhouse gas footprint, because gas being twice as good as coal, half as bad as coal, only applies to its combustion when you're actually burning it to get energy, and not for its whole life cycle. So there are issues there around whether you're getting too much methane, which itself is a greenhouse gas, leaking directly into the atmosphere, and that's an active debate internationally. So very difficult to reach conclusion. My conclusion is, as is very commonly do about climate change, a good strong price signal on carbon dioxide